Hello and welcome to On the Same Page, a new series of intergenerational conversations by changing the narrative in Colorado. I'm your host, Dominic Gizzuti. Thank you so much for joining us. I am joined today by a very diverse group of people to discuss ageism and how we can come together to end it. Allow me to introduce our esteemed panel. First up, Marge Fajardo, president of Key Results Coaching and a board member of SRB. Andrew Hudson, founder of Andrew Hudson's Job List. Christiane Eteen, chair of the Strategic Action Planning Group on Aging and a professor in the Department of Social Work at MSU Denver. Andrea Kewick, a policy analyst with the Bell Policy Center. Jillian Lee, a doctorate of occupational therapy student. Cece Ortiz, a community activist. Morris Price Jr., vice president and executive director of City Year Denver. And Janine Vanderberg, director of Changing the Narrative in Colorado. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. Janine, I want to start with you because I think we need to set some parameters, some definitions. Let's think about ageism. Define the word ageism for our viewers at home and really set the table of why we should care about this important topic.
You bet. So ageism is basically stereotyping, prejudice, discrimination against people because of their age. It can be directed against younger people. So if someone is calling a colleague an entitled millennial or saying things like these young people, that's ageism. It's basically making judgments about people based on a number, their chronological age, instead of looking at who the individual is. So one of the reasons we should all care about it, it's one thing that we're all going to face, right? For each one of us today is the oldest we've ever been, and I want everybody on the panel and viewers at home to think about before you go to sleep tonight, it's the youngest you'll ever be, right? If we are fortunate, we are all headed in that direction. But there are serious consequences attached to ageism, including research has shown that when we experience ageism, it affects our physical health, it affects our mental health. One study showed it shortens our lifespan on average 7.5 years. We also know that as we age, the likelihood that we are going to suffer financially and experience workplace discrimination is pretty high. So a study by the Urban Institute last year of 20,000 people across the United States showed that 56% of people who entered their 50s with stable employment were either pushed out or laid off, and only 10% of them ever recovered financially. So especially now as we're looking at things like layoffs with COVID-19, knowing that older people are more likely to be pushed out, when older people are pushed out of the workforce, they have a much longer time than younger people do of being able to get back in. So those are some of the consequences we care about. We know that it's fairly prevalent. One of the things in my role at Changing the Narrative is in the last 2.5 years, I've traveled all around the state doing workshops. And in every single workshop that I've done, someone has come up to me, either during the workshop or after, and said, you know, that age and workplace discrimination thing you're talking about happened to me, happened to my partner, happened to my mom or dad. And I heard this again and again. And then, you know, another study came out from AARP just earlier this year showing that about 2/3 of people age 45 and over have actually experienced or witnessed age discrimination in the workplace. So we know it's a serious issue, and I'm thrilled that everybody is here to talk about it.
I'm thrilled as well, Janine. I want to go to one of our employer experts. Andrew, I want to go to you next. And hear those numbers from Janine, and it's shocking, but I could also understand it. I want to get with you about, are these numbers real, and what are you seeing in the job, really the work atmosphere, both pre-COVID and now in the midst of the COVID crisis?
Well, as Janine so rightfully put it, as in all isms, whether it's racism, sexism, ageism, or biases against the LGBTQ, the culture of a community, and that's whether it's a society at large or whether it's a corporate culture, these isms devalue people and perpetuates the message that we want people who look, behave, and act a certain way, talents be damned. I have had so many conversations with job seekers over the age of 50 who begin their conversations with me by giving me a version of my best days are behind me, or I'm over the hill. Other words I've heard that contribute to this is what I call ageist stinking thinking, like I'm old school, I'm inflicted with senioritis, or I'm a little long in the tooth, or my career shelf life is about to expire. It's defeatist self-talk, but it's the result of the narratives that are constantly reinforced by society against aging Americans. Specifically, when they're applying for jobs, when the job posting specifically asks for younger job seekers, or asking for folks using ageism code words like energetic person for young company, or digital natives, which basically means you've been born with a cell phone, recent graduates, cultural fit. These are phrases, some which are completely illegal, that try to mask discrimination against older job seekers. Now think about that and how subtle and not too subtle digs at age play on a job seeker's psyche. They'll say, my experiences and accomplishments are no longer valuable, or I'm an imposter. I don't have the right skills to fit in a young environment. I'm overqualified, or I'm underqualified. And then this is followed by taking complete self-sabotaging job-seeking behavior, trying to dumb down a resume to appear younger, leaving off important job titles to hide your senior skills, or applying for jobs that are simply not a good fit in terms of the experience or your value, with the hope that you can simply find a job with benefits to push you to retirement. And so many job seekers I consult with that have developed these narratives about themselves are descriptions of a person that even they don't recognize. It is not a reflection of their education, their skills, their successes, or their abilities and their personalities. They're trying their hardest to hide these things.
Andrew, I think it's an incredibly important perspective you're offering. So first of all, thank you for doing that. I want to go around to the rest of our panel and just basically your initial impressions and experiences with ageism. I'm sure it's something that everybody hits, but I think this panel can offer a lot of great perspective. Marge, let me go to you first. When you hear about these statistics and realities, what are some of the things that you've experienced and seen with the group that you work with that our viewers should know about?
Well, two areas come up for me. One is employment, because for several years I worked at a government employment agency, and I saw, as Andrew was talking about, I saw all of the mental thinking that we had to help these people overcome so that they could even get up in the morning. So that's one big area. And the other is in healthcare. When my parents were still alive and I was helping them through some health issues, the way that they were treated, they were condescended to. And one experience I had myself was going to a female doctor who was about in her, I would say she was in her 40s, and I had some kind of a health concern. And when I shared it with her, she said, "Oh, that's the damage of all those birthdays." And at first I kind of laughed. And then after she said it like 3 times, I thought, you know what? That is not being willing to listen to me and not being willing to explore what this might really be.
What a great perspective, Marge. Thank you for that. Christiane, I want to go to you next, especially with your work in public policy on this matter. I've got to believe that you've run into a variety of issues, both yourself and also the folks you're working with. And I think that'd be very valuable for our viewers to hear, but also for us to kind of set the stage of what kind of prevalent problem ageism is. What do you think?
So when we look at ageism, I think it's helpful to think about it in multiple contexts. Janine and Andrew have talked about the workforce, and the workforce piece of this is huge. For those older adults who want to or need to stay in the workforce for as long as they choose to. But we also have ageism that permeates society at all levels. I think about what we're seeing unfolding in the presidential race. We have 2 folks in their 70s running, and each of them has accused the other of being senile. And we sort of just assume this is okay to talk about somebody who's older as senile. We equate their behavior with that. And we see it in healthcare and the disparities that we've seen. Each area portrays its own way that this ageism, but I think it's actually more about an implicit and unconscious bias that people have in terms of how they understand what it means to get old. And they internalize that and they externalize it.
Andrew, I want to go to you next because I got to believe with your work with the Bell Policy Center, you're seeing ageism at various levels. We've talked about some significant examples with older Americans, but frankly, this is something that I could see really across the spectrum. And with policy, I got to believe you can see some real ramifications with that. So are there stories from your work, the Bell Policy Center, about ageism that we should know about?
Yeah, so at the Bell Policy Center, we focus on a lot of macro level issues. So really looking at what the policy realm means for people's lives. And so the really fascinating part about all of this is that, we all see this in our own individual lives and kind of across the board. As we've been looking a lot more specifically at ageism, a lot of the pieces that we've been really talking about and highlighting, I've really seen, I think in very real time. I think also with my mom. My mom is an older woman who's in the workforce. She's done a lot of amazing work in building a specific program out in Pittsburgh. But she talks to me on a regular basis around the fact that, she gets questions all the time about when she's going to retire, what that's going to look like. And my mom has never talked about retiring, but she gets all of these questions from folks. She also talks to me on a regular basis about what she can be doing to look younger, even though she has no desire to make herself look younger, but she's concerned about being viewed as someone who's maybe not as competent as she would be because she's older. So I think in our lives, we really see a lot of these policy pieces on a regular basis, and really I think the emotional toll that this takes on people and the health toll that it takes on people whenever we don't talk about these, and really with kind of that under addressed issue kind of across the board.
Jillian, I want to go to you next because as a doctorate of occupational therapy student, you're already part of an industry, but going to be even a greater expert in an industry that's going to really see work being done across the age spectrum. But I got to believe that your perspective on this, especially even from a cultural standpoint, is unique. Tell us about what you think.
So one of the things that stood out to me just in talking about this is the employment and the workforce, right? And one of my previous jobs, I had worked with most of my coworkers were in the age range of 23 to 35 years old, except for one. She had been a therapist for 20 years, and she had some difficulties navigating the electronic health record, and she really struggled with that and was judged by our other coworkers because they would make comments such as, oh, she's older and she just doesn't understand how it works and it's never going to change. And that brought a lot of stress for her and made her feel inadequate and incompetent in the workplace.
See, so let me go to you guys. I got to believe as a community activist, here is something where the experience of older members of a group would be vital to see the best strategies within a community and speak with the community. But you also need the energy brought with some newer members, which are probably going to come from younger folks. And you're going to see that really work together. They really, any sort of movement cannot be sustainable from just using one end of the spectrum. You need everyone coming together. I'm interested in your perspective on this and what you've seen with your work as a community activist.
I've been really blessed by having the opportunity to work in community. And in that process, I had what some would call a real job 10, 12 years ago when I was turning 59, hitting 60. And I realized that was a shock to people. People were feeling once I was done with that job that I'd want to hang out and do nothing. And it became very clear to me that no, I couldn't do that, first of all. But secondly, you're absolutely right. When I think about the work that I'm doing now, it's such a blessing. So I guess I'm going to make myself my own the example about how I think there were times when I wasn't sure. Should I just stop working? Can I do all of this? And community was always surrounding me with the idea that, yeah, we need you to do certain things. What I've realized in that process is I had the opportunity to work with young people. And there were times when I truly probably wasn't very nice to young people because I was I had some of that feeling around, or the stereotyping about, and Janine can relate to me on this, around, why do they quit jobs? Or, why don't they keep a job? And in this process, working with young organizers, I needed them as much as they needed me. And we come out ahead because I'm able to talk about maybe things that didn't work. And they're also in line to tell me, okay, let me think about, that was great. So what do you think about this? And it changed my whole thinking about the whole idea of reframing aging. And I was, so I've been very blessed with that. I also, as an organizer, I also did my data. They always say, you always check your data. And I went out and talked to women. And I'm not real, again, it's not unique. Women aren't sure where they, specifically women, not sure where they sit after the age of 60. I'm now 69 and I'm not going to stop working because I don't need to and I don't want to. So, organizing, you see a lot there that now I cringe when I hear stuff. So I'm trying to be very good, trying just to be open about how we help communities understand the interconnectedness between us and youth and younger adults. And younger adults could be anything. But I appreciate your answer, your question, because you really answered it in terms of the importance of community in this process and how this is an opportunity for interdependence now, if ever. And community organizing is all about interdependence.
Boris, your work with City Year Denver, I think, would be another one of these unique opportunities where you're working with a lot of different people and showcasing what each member of a variety of generations can bring to an effort. I'm going to make that assumption just from what I've seen from the accomplishments of City Year Denver. But tell us about your experiences with ageism and how you've worked with it within City Year.
Thank you. It's a great question. Interesting. City Year lives in that spectrum. Our core members, our AmeriCorps members, are 18 to 25-year-olds. Those who've just left the house from high school and those who've gone to college doing year of service. We engage mentors who are people in their career to mentor them while they do service. And we also have a staff. And it's interesting, we see the difference between often when I'm referring to, and I'll say when I'm on a plane and I say what I do and I'm managing 75 young people, I get that, ooh, those sparky young idealists, as if they're reducing down their idealism and energy to something that's trivial or going to pass, as opposed to they're very committed to it and they're dead serious about it. I think we see the impact of that when you look at what's happened in recent news. When we are identifying mentors for them, the needs of an 18 to 25-year-old vary as much as anything. But when I suggest we've had some young folks who've just graduated from college and they want to mentor, are they old enough? Meaning, have they had enough life experience to advise someone? As if the only way to define that experience is based on years, as opposed to the generation someone may have come from poverty and they put themselves through college. That could be invaluable to a young person. Or they've started their own business, and in that short time, they have picked up as much experience as someone who's been in the industry for years. In hiring, we recently hired someone who is an older adult and was having difficulties with technology. The younger person's response was, it's what happens when it deals with old people with a computer. As opposed to, no, this is a new software that all of us are having challenges with. He was just thoughtful enough to ask for assistance. And watching younger people believe that they can master technology, and those who've grown up and grew into variations of it, from the flip phone to the iPhone, they minimize the ability to adapt and to learn. And I'm reminded of the quote that as you think about never make fun of your parents with technology, your mother taught you how to use a spoon. There are elements of this that we learn based on our abilities, not on our age.
I love that, what you just ended with there, Morris, of never making fun of your mother. She taught you to work a spoon. I think about that, of how often I've relied on my father's not only advice and guidance, but just simply the operation of tools that, like, I would think, whether I'm 48 right now, but I was this dense, I'm 28, 38, 48, I imagine my density will continue, but thinking I could overcome it with whatever I think I know right now. And my father saying, if you use this particular tool the right way, it'd actually be better. I think you bring up a great point. Let me change directions a little bit here and talk about what we're going through as a world with the current COVID-19 pandemic. It's been said that this pandemic has really exacerbated and worsened some inequities. I think especially when it comes to generational issues, because frankly, it's just been scary on all ends of this, looking at this. Christiane, I want to start with you. When you look at the idea of ageism, but through the lens of this pandemic and really what it has created, what are some of the big issues for you that all of us need to know?
So I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing right now is that we talk about age and COVID. We assume that as you're older, you're sicker, and that this is really a problem for old people. Today in the news, we're hearing about that the biggest spread right now is actually the middle age group, from about 20 to 40. They're the ones who are spreading and not immune from being in the hospital. One of the commentators just pointed out that in Texas, I believe it was 1,000 people in that age group are in the hospital, which indicates that they are having significant problems. When we're talking about age and COVID, one of my major concerns is that we're talking about an age group from anywhere from 50 to 60 all the way up to 100 plus. That's a 50-year age span. It's huge. And we lump together those who have pre-existing conditions as well as those who are in congregate care. And we sort of assume that all of that is the same around aging, and it's not. There is huge variability, and I think that this need, because this is so out of our control right now, I mean, I think part of the concern that we have is that we are out of control in terms of how we understand this disease and how we operate, that we are looking for simple answers. And it leads us down the road of those basic stereotypes, and we then begin to make policy based on that, just age. So in Colorado, we have a stay-at-home order that right now is basically suggesting that those over 65 stay at home. That's really not a useful policy position because it is based on a stereotype. Yes, there's a grain of truth in it, but ultimately it is a stereotype.
It makes a great point. Andrew, I want to go to you because clearly everything in the business world and the workplace has changed because of COVID, but I think especially when you think about older Americans and some of the how fast things have changed, of the assumptions of, well, it's terribly dangerous over here, but it's perfectly fine here. But the fact of the matter is, it's a terrible pandemic for everybody. It's not as if it's just a bad thing for one particular group of people. What have you seen in the workplace when it comes to COVID-19 and exacerbating some inequities?
Sure. I really appreciated what Christian had to say, because state health officials have been proactively telling the public that older Coloradans need to observe more stringent stay-at-home and social distancing. And we can all agree and rationally understand that older Americans are more susceptible to COVID. It's also such a chilling message that it is somehow unwise to be connected and to work with older people as if they have somewhat of a scarlet letter attached to them. And we've got to be careful about this because, you know, that can extend to, as Christian was saying, more policies than justifications about, you know, why it's okay to somehow discriminate against older Americans in the workplace. And it's a very scary time, I think. And I think we need to really have check that at the door and really ask ourselves whether these are the kinds of narratives and messages that we need to talk. And also, to Christian's point, there is so much more that is unknown about COVID as well. And so it's a very slippery slope that I think we're going down.
Andrew, I think you make a great point. I mean, I think about my own workplace. I have the great privilege of being able to work with a variety of generations in my small team. But I have folks who in their 30s are asthmatics. I have folks in their 60s who might be high risk because of some medical issues. I want to take care of both of them. I'm not going to think that my 30-year-old colleagues can suddenly be impervious to anything, because I may not be thinking about the different issues that they're facing. And I'm not going to put my 60-year-old colleague in a plastic bubble because they might have some issues. It's about protecting everybody. Cease, let me go to you next. Exacerbating these issues during a COVID outbreak, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, my work has blessed me to be able to work with immigrant communities, and very concerning because they just they're not going to go out unless they have to get health care a lot of times, just because of their immigration status. And I see that's an issue that for us is critical, and families are then of course having to take care of them. So from the perspective of COVID, I think, and the inequities of that disease and virus, it really is. It's you can't really talk about it. They're not going to talk about it. You're going to hear about it, but at the end of the day, we're always concerned, and the work that we're doing is to look at what's happening in communities of color. And of course, in my specific situation, really looking at this immigration issue that, again, back to policy, is poor policy. It talks then about, again, we look at healthcare and all of what needs to happen there. But overall, I think that I have to agree with my colleagues. The other issue is just this whole idea of the vulnerables. I'll just use an example. When a young man was talking to me about something and said that basically, everybody else needs to be at work, but we got, still waiting on the vulnerables over 62 to be able to get back to work. And he was, of course, being very honest. And then he realized that, what he had said, but it was really, he was so kind about it. But it was like, yeah, it really, for me, it said to me, we're quarantined, basically. And I do think, I will say, shout out to the governor on this. I watched words that come out, and he's been great about talking about, older Coloradans not using language. That just begins a continued, sense of prejudice and stereotyping that is happening. So it's complicated, but I also believe I'm concerned what this is going to mean moving forward.
Morris, I got to believe with your work with City or Denver that you might even see the ageism exacerbated on two levels. One, we've already talked about some of the issues with older Americans, but I can even see younger Americans being put into an unfair box, because you do see some younger Americans in other parts of the country being thinking that this is no big deal. But I also see a lot of young people wearing a mask and doing the right thing, taking care of everybody around them. How have you seen these issues bear out with your work?
I'm struck on this issue about acceptable loss, that when people talk about what we could lose by not staying prevalent with our mask, as if to say it's okay that we're going to lose people who are older adults, because as if their life is done. There's no value in them. If this were something dramatically disproportionately impacting, let's say, kids 5 and under, there would not be the same, well, it's okay as long as we can have our jobs. It's an acceptable loss of people. There's a concern that, well, you've had your best years, you've given us your best effort, it's okay that we lose you. When I think about what we've just gone through in transitions, we have some positions we're transitioning. It was someone in the office who was the older who said, I've been through this before. And here's how you survive it. Here's how you get past it. It's not the end of the world. To have that voice of reason and experience, let these younger people know that you may be transitioning out of a job, but things provide an opportunity. That's invaluable. That can only come from someone who's lived that life experience. So I think having that balance, and unfortunately we have that balance in our office, but I also see it in others, that to me is the real value of having the multiple generations there. Not so assuming one is so acceptable to lose.
Art, if we come to you, I'm very interested in your perspective on this, because I think probably as a coach or working with other coaches, you're probably seeing some of these problems bubble right to the top, and especially over these last few months with COVID. What's your perspective?
Well, some of the executives that I coach they're all over the world, actually, but it's interesting because some of them are having to lay off people. And I have to talk them through how they're going to make those decisions. And of course, a lot of them want to start out with laying off the older people. There's some of them, on the other hand, who want to start out with the younger people just because they don't want to lose the expertise. So it's about talking it through and having the conversation so that they can really figure out what are their criteria for furloughing people, for laying off people, that kind of thing. And then how are they going to hire people back?
Well, Janine, I think it's appropriate we go to you next. I think we need to get some way to kind of wrap this up as you look at the effect of COVID-19 really exacerbating these inequities and what you're really seeing across the spectrum.
Yeah, so really echoing what everybody said, but I really want to highlight especially what Morris said about this idea of acceptable loss. I think early on when the Lieutenant Governor of Texas said something, well, grandparents should die so the children in the economy should live, everybody was thinking, well, that's outrageous. And then a few weeks ago, MIT economists published very fancy research paper that says essentially the same thing and says, this is how we reopen. I was on an international call a couple of weeks ago where this wonderful woman who's about to hit 90, who's written a bunch of books, said, this has set us back at least 20 years. So now I need to live another 20 years longer, right, to write all of this. But so it's worrisome because I do worry, like the other panelists have said, about how it is going to play out in policy, how it is playing out in policy now. And I think that's why, all of us need to elevate our voices to call attention to it and not just accept, and I'm going to put myself in this category, well, just step aside because you're older. No, we have value and we have a voice, an important voice to lend, and we need to make sure that we're using it now.
Jillian, I want to go to you next. I want to dovetail off of something that Janine referenced. She talked about her international call, and I think there is an important cultural angle to this we may not really have talked about, specifically with your family's roots and traditions from the Philippines. There's an angle here that we cannot take for granted, and frankly is a big part of this, not only with just the COVID outbreak, but I think ageism in general, and how we look at all the different older and younger people in our lives, regardless of our own age. Give us a little bit of your thoughts about when we put it through a cultural lens.
Okay, so in the Philippines, older adults are very much respected, right? They're seen as people you could go to for advice, and growing up, we always had to show respect anytime we encountered older individuals. So in the Philippines, we would have to do this thing called mano, which is basically you take their hand and then you lift it up to your forehead as a sign of respect. And we also had terms for people who are older than us, depending on if they're family members, but just in general, the elderly, and older adults, we would have to say, we would have to call them apo or lolo or lola, and we don't just, call them by their names. They are also very much they're really loved in the Philippines, in families specifically, when an individual becomes older and are no longer capable of, being independent. They usually will be taken care of by their families. They will be moving in with their families, and they're not just, they're not expected to continue taking care of themselves or be taken into homes. And so, when I came here, I was very surprised about that, because I observed and I've noticed that older adults here typically, I've seen disrespect, and I've seen them made fun of or talked back to, and it just, it seems like it's somewhat of a common occurrence, just from what I've seen. And they also are viewed as vulnerable here, and as opposed to a respected population. And I've noticed a big disconnect with the older people and other generations, the younger generations. So to me, there are moments where I feel that, they're almost seen as individuals who don't serve a purpose here. And it's been really, really difficult for me to see that, especially, growing up where I grew up and seeing what I saw and being raised the way that I was raised. So that's why, it's important to address ageism for me personally.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think back to what, how many of my fond memories I have in my life, and how many of them are attached to either my one of my grandmothers, one of my grandfathers, and now I get to watch my my own parents be grandparents with my nephews, and there's no greater joy for me, but it's because there's that mutual love and respect. It's neither group has been taken each for granted. I think you have a great point. Let me get to what is my favorite part about On the Same Page. It's about identifying problems, but it's also about identifying solutions. What can we do about it? So this is a tougher question, but I think that's a great thing about having a wonderful panel like all of you. So let's get to what we can do about it. Solutions you've seen, solutions you're a part of. Morris, I'm going to put you on the spot first. So what is your work? What have you done? What do you think that we can attach some hope to as we're looking forward?
I think mine is less about my professional work than I see from my personal life. When my father passed and I was seeing myself assisting my mother move through the transition, someone asked me, well, are you going to move her into an assisted living and sell the house? It's not my house to sell. Just because my father's no longer there and my mother's past a certain age doesn't mean all control goes to the younger person. It's still her home and her decision. My job is to assist, not to take control. When a friend turned 50, there was this overhype to go get black balloons because he turned 50. And literally going through the cards in the marketing, all the cards, when you say someone celebrated 70 or 60, it was around someone who is physically underbuilt and they're crippled as opposed to vibrant, and they're celebrating. All the young cards were about partying. And so I think how we approach these things on a day-to-day basis, from marketing to educating folks, what if that were you? And the only choice you had was 4 cards that said you're going to have a cane, a wheelchair, or that you're crippled. I looked at the term when someone thought it was a compliment that said, black don't crack. One, it's insensitive racially. 2, is imply if you have lines on your face, that's a sign of something that's bad, as opposed to it could be genetic, it could be you've had that kind of life experience. So I think we have to refrain it from these vague theories and make it so personal that you could understand if someone told you have to go sell your mother's house, or that the only choice you had was everything about a life celebration was negative, how would you feel? And approach that back into your work.
Marge, I think Morris brings up a lot of great points, but specifically I want to get with you about messaging and language. It is such an important part of our society that evolves. I think about just in my lifetime, let alone generations ago, how important it has been that we've evolved our messaging and language. What are the kind of words and messaging that we need to be sure that we're evolving now when it comes to the terms of and the issue of ageism?
Well, I think we really need to be careful of global labeling, which we've talked about. I've heard people talk about that throughout this conversation, talking about aging people as being weak and vulnerable, lonely. Research actually shows that the youngest group of lonely people are between 18 and 24. So we use words that actually create conditions for people, and sometimes people in those groups actually adopt those words as who they are. And so I think we have to be really careful about how we speak about people. We need to have more conversations so that people have more awareness of this. We also need to have more intergenerational activities. There's a lot of people who don't live near their grandparents, so they may not know older people that they would have relationships with on a very intimate level. So we need to continue to bring people together. And I guess the other thing we need to do is make sure that when we're talking about older adults, we talk about how vibrant they are and about how their experiences can actually create a world where other people are enhanced by their wisdom, and also creating a culture where people who are older adults can actually continue to develop their potential because they haven't stopped growing. It's all about continuing to grow and evolve and learn.
wholeheartedly agree with both of my parents. I hope to have their energy someday, not when I'm their age. If I could have that energy now, I would be very happy. So I think you bring up some great points when it comes to the messaging and what we attach to particular generations. Andrew, you talked about some of the messaging and language points in your last comments when it comes to employers. People saying a young company or energetic. What do you think are some of the most important things we need to look at as the positive movements, the changes that need to happen as we look at this issue in the workplace?
Well, I think on a one-on-one basis, my goal is to work with job seekers and change the narrative in the sense that what if your best days are still in front of you? Why can't your future dreams still be filled with joy, excitement, intellectual searching? Why can't your next job search also be part of that adventure as well? George Eliot had a great quote, and he said, "It's never too late to be what you might have been." And so, my goal is, and it's not just with job seekers, it's with employers as well. I mean, we're going through this massive disruption, this post-COVID disruption, and companies are facing serious challenges. Just think about the maturity of experience, skills, specific accomplishments that can't be overstated in terms of so many of these aging Americans that have that kind of background and experience. There's certainly obstacles out there for older Americans, and if we're not careful, those obstacles can become impenetrable barriers. But we also have to start to recognize that it starts not only with the individuals, it's with the employers as well as the policies. And we need to be very careful moving forward, particularly in this COVID environment.
Christiane, I want to go to you next, especially with your work as on a strategic planning group. Anytime I see those kinds of words, those are very important words. Speaking of messaging or words, what are some of the things that you're seeing and that you're looking at as solutions, ways to address this problem so that we can move forward in a more positive fashion?
So great question. So I think when I look at the recommendations we've put forward, and the Strategic Action Planning Group has been in existence since 2015, our first recommendation was that there be a senior policy advisor in the governor's office. And we've made other recommendations that have mirrored this in the sense that we need to have the voice at the table of those impacted by the issue. And that's really true for all isms. We talk about having Black and Latino and Asian and GLBTQI and all of these groups at the table, especially in those areas that are impacting their lives. So if we're going to really address ism, we have to invite folks to be at the table and insist through policy that they're at the table. And then languaging within how we talk about things. So we're looking at proposing a possible office related to aging, older Coloradans. And we talk about that as potentially being the office of longevity and vitality. Because that's ultimately what we're about. We're about life from conception all the way through to lands. And those are the only two things we really know about that are going to happen. We're going to be born and we are going to die. Those are realities. So how do we embrace that across the lifespan and throughout all parts of our lives? So from a policy perspective, that's how SAPCA is looking at this holistically and ensuring that the voice of older Coloradans is at the table in those areas that are going to affect their lives.
Andrea, let's go to you next talking about this, because I think with your work at the Bell Policy Center, I got to believe language and messaging is always going to be forefront, and how it evolves. And I also believe that really anybody working in policy is looking at how things can positively evolve and change. So this is important for me. What do you think about this as we're thinking about ways to address this issue?
Yeah, so I think that is such a great question. I think that there are two things that really initially come to mind. I think as we talk about addressing this, there are a number of immediate things that we can really think about doing. So as we think about employment, thinking about different ways in which we can strengthen age discrimination laws, thinking about ways which we can immediately start taking steps to say, so what are the tools that other people who might be discriminating against somebody by age, but in anything else might be using to do all of that, but people wouldn't know. So for an example of that, and I think Janine has been an amazing person to really talk about the importance of this and really bring the this to light, you know, if we talk about the ways in which employers are looking at and may screen people out based upon different types of things that other folks wouldn't even recognize. So if we're talking about on applications about employers screening people out based upon their high school graduation date or their college graduation date. And of course, that goes on both ends of the spectrum of both ages. So those are some of the immediate things, but I think that there's also a bigger question about this that in the policy world that we really need to really think about and we really need to do better with, which I think Christiane just really mentioned, is that as we look at policies, as we look at this, it's looking at the intersections across the board. So as we look at these different policies, there's often a kind of an initial movement towards saying, you know, I'm working on either older adult issues, I'm working on child care issues, I'm working on labor force issues, but we don't really recognize about how interconnected each of these different areas are. So as a concrete example of that, you know, when we talk about policies, you know, we talk about the earned income tax credit as a great example of this. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a tax credit that benefits working individuals who are low to moderate income and provides them with a tax credit at the end of the year. But this tax credit, it's age bracketed, both on the higher income and the higher end, and also on the low income and on the lower end of the age spectrum. So on the upper end, you know, you don't get this tax credit once you reach the age of 65. And so there are things like that where as we look at the different policies that we are proposing or that we're looking to better and make stronger, it's really looking at these policies through an age-friendly lens and really seeing the kind of the very intricacies that really make up our communities. And so whenever we look at it in that type of lens, we're better able to create policies that work better for everyone.
See, so I want to wrap up this topic about what we can do about it with you, because you mentioned messaging and the importance of language. And I think we've heard that from other comments, but I want to dig a little bit deeper to that with you. When you're looking at what we can do about this, how we can address ageism and the importance of messaging and language, what are some of the most important thoughts coming to you?
Well, again, just I agree with Christiane on everything he said in relationship to good organizing. I'm going to go back there. You know, when you're dealing with community, the community that's most impacted needs to be in the room. So absolutely, I totally agree with Christiane on that. To my, I guess my thought on all of this is that words matter. So I think we need to be really, really aware of what is being said, again, whether from a policy perspective or whether it is in the community. How we, all of us in the room at this point, Zoom room, is really around how do we help people think differently around language, because I don't think people even know sometimes they're doing it. So for us as a community, it has always been important. I would say that I've worked mostly in the Latino community, so been very blessed. They keep me really, really honest around this because of the issues we highly respect on and admire our elders. And so I'm feeling like if there could be more opportunity for that, especially around caregiving. Nobody's talked about it per se, but as we look at caregiving, it's critical that caregivers also hear this very clearly. And I'm trying to figure out ways that we can make that happen with Janine's leadership, but it's critical. So I can't say much more other than the fact that it is the community now has to be involved in this process. We have to bring elders to the community and into within this table and be part of it and be able to lead it along with our young ones, of course. So whatever that means, I'm going to be very, very. This has been a great opportunity for me to kind of think about how do we organize? What does that look like? Who's not at the table? So again, thank you.
Well, you brought up a great name there and talking about Janine. Janine, one of the wonderful things I love about On the Same Page, not only do we get into some positive points of what we can do about a problem, but we think about the future. So with just a couple minutes left in the show, I want to go to you to talk about when you look at the future of dealing with the problem of ageism, but clearly a lot of tools at our disposal to do something about it. And the fact that this is a problem that we can see from across the generations. It is hitting so many different people. This is not something that anyone really has any problem seeing examples in their lives, sadly, but also that gives us an opportunity to do something about it. So you're looking ahead to the future. What can be done? Your thoughts?
Well, what I'm hoping post-COVID-19 is that we're going to be able to have these conversations in person again. Last fall, Changing the Narrative piloted this idea of let's bring generations together to talk about topics that matter. And literally within a month, we had 60 conversations involving over 600 people, not only in Colorado, but, we kind of put it on the internet, and, there were people from all over the world that were engaged in this. And we now have kind of a toolkit on our website. We were so grateful to be able to, when we approached PBS 12 about, can we do some of these online since we can't get together in person every time. So what I'm really hopeful about is this idea, and we've talked about interconnectedness throughout. When we talk together, every conversation we discover we really have more in common than we have apart. Younger people and older people want meaning and purpose. Younger people and older people want to be treated with respect. Younger people and older people want to be socially connected. They don't want to be lonely. That's what we found in the first of this series that we did. So what I'm really hopeful about is more conversations like this. I have loved doing this virtually. I'm really, really looking forward to doing them in person again, because there's something about being able to sit around a table and see people eye to eye, but that's what I'm hopeful about.
Well, I tell you what, I think you've hit the nail on the head as usual, Janine, because it's about conversation. And I know I'm grateful for your kind words about PBS 12. It's been exciting for us to be a part of the conversation, regardless of the platform. And I think that's one of the lessons I take away from how we have had to adapt across really across the board. We've had to adapt, and the conversation can still happen. If it's a different platform, fine. And I know it's different than if we're in person, but it keeps the priority being the conversation. And Janine, I'm just grateful that you've found a way that we could still have these conversations with all these different topics and all these different people, because that, I think, is what we can easily miss. We get into, whether by ourselves or just in our families and our homes, the conversations can still happen. We might have to put a little bit more work into it. We might have to figure out the different microphone settings and camera stuff and lights in a house, which was never an issue in person. But let's face it, when we were meeting in person, we always made sure we were dressed nicely and everything else. Well, we can. The nice thing is you can wear your slippers for the Zoom call, but you might have to figure out your camera settings on your phone, on your desktop. It really doesn't matter, as long as we're concentrating that the priority is talking to each other. That, I think, is where all of you have talked about where we find the solution. So on behalf of PBS 12, thank you so much for letting us be a part of this. And I want to thank everybody here for being a part of this particular discussion. This has been a wonderful panel, and just really, again, I want to reiterate my thanks for joining us today for On the Same Page. If you like to watch the show or the rest of the series online, please check it out at pbs12.org. And if you would like more information, find a free toolkit to host your own conversation, you can visit changingthenarrativeco.org/onthesamepage. For everybody here at On the Same Page, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.